consciousness of the people than a totalitarian form of government. So, even a totalitarian form of government is somewhat responsive to the consciousness of the people, but a democratic government is far more responsive. So when the consciousness of the people shifts, the government must change its behavior, its laws, its procedures and goals. And so, this is of course all tied in with the greater goal of the Golden Age, which is not, as I've said before, that I am going to drop this Golden Age down upon the people as if I was some almighty God sitting up here, which I am not and which has never been my intention. The Golden Age can only be created when there are people in embodiment who co-create it with me by tuning into the ideas and by acting upon them. And again, how can you manifest the Golden Age if you do not have the vision, the awareness of what is even possible? And what is the primary exploitation foisted upon the people by the power elites that you have seen through history? It is precisely that there are so many things on earth that are seen as insurmountable obstacles, as limitations you cannot go beyond. There is nothing you can do about that. You will run out of oil and there is nothing you can do about it. Well, my beloved, this is one of the most sincere or severe forms of exploitation of the people. All of these limitations prevent the people from actually accepting that a better society is possible. Go back just a few hundred years. Look at the fact that in most of what are now the democratic nations, the majority of the population could not read and write. They could not read books that could give them a higher vision. Go back 200 years. Take the average person back then. Explain to him what kind of society you have today, and he would refuse to believe you. He would label this as complete utopia, complete daydreaming, complete fantasy. Yet you are experiencing it as a daily reality. You always have enough food to eat. You don't have to show up at the landowner's land and work for free. You don't have to be afraid of the police. You don't have to work 16 hours a day just to survive physically. You don't have to walk if you want to get somewhere. You can get into a car, and by pushing a button, you are moving forward. Who would believe this 200 years ago? If you're going far away, you get into some machine that takes off into the sky, my beloved. How would they have looked at this? Complete fantasy. So what I'm pointing out here is that if you go back 200 years, you could see that with their level of awareness, they could not accept that the society you have today was even possible. And what am I seeking to point out with this? It is that most people today cannot accept that the golden age that I envision and that I know is a realistic possibility. These people cannot in any way accept that this golden age is truly possible. Even though they have seen so much technological progress in the last 100 years, even though they have seen so many changes in society, they still would not be able to accept my vision of what is possible in the golden age. And this is an engineered state put upon the people by the power elites of all time who want to restrict their vision and their ability to accept what is possible. Because if a majority of the people think something is impossible, then it will, for all practical purposes, be impossible. I am one of the primary Ascended Masters who has sponsored the release of most of the technology you see in the modern world. Why have I done this? Because I knew that there was no way that the people of a few hundred years ago could step up in their minds to accept my vision for the Golden Age. Therefore, I needed to bring forth mechanical technology that had visible, undeniable effects that were beyond what people could envision just decades ago. And when they saw this technology, and when they saw that here it was demonstrated that what their parents thought was impossible is now possible, well, then it could gradually open their minds to see greater possibilities. And this has, to a large degree, happened, but it has not happened to the degree where people can accept the Golden Age as I fully envision it. And so this is what I look for you to make the calls on, to envision in your minds that people will go even higher. And so it is in fact not unrealistic that many people will begin to understand that the most subtle and the most dangerous form of exploitation is when a small power elite limits the vision and the awareness of the population, limits what people believe is possible, what they can even dare to dream about. This, of course, has only one purpose, and it is easy enough for people to see this. It is that the power elite want to stay in control. They want to stay in power. And in order to do this, they will always try to maintain status quo. And how do they maintain status quo? By limiting the people's awareness so that people think that it is not possible to manifest a much better society, a much higher state. We have pretty much gone as far as we can go. Have you not seen how even in the modern world this is being programmed into the collective consciousness? We have gone as high as we can go. We have discovered all there is to discover. We have reached the limits for growth. We are running out of resources, this and that limitation. And the purpose is simply to limit people's ability to envision and accept that there is a much better state waiting in the future. There are also those who say that what we have is good enough and we don't need to go any higher. We just need to maintain the current democracies. There is no need to step up to a higher level with direct democracy and this and that. All of this has only one purpose: to keep the power elite in power. And millions of people are ready to consciously acknowledge this. They already know it within, and when presented to them, it will seem obvious to them. Now you will notice that so far I have spoken without talking about the more esoteric aspects of our teachings, such as ascended masters, fallen beings, this or that. These are just universal concepts that people are ready to grasp at some level or other. But it is possible to go even a little further, because it is possible to look at the fact that whatever progress has been made in society, there has always been an elite who tried to take advantage of it. I have given teachings before that it is obvious to see that there is an established power elite, and at certain times in history you have seen the emergence of an aspiring power elite that have then managed to abuse the people, to exploit the people, to overthrow the established power elite, but only to the effect that the aspiring power elite now took over and now they became the established power elite. And it is possible to help people see that this is a pattern that has repeated over and over again, and maybe it is time in our democratic nations that we make an effort to realize that even though the creation of democracies overthrew the established elite of the king or the emperor and the noble class, there has been an aspiring power elite who has attempted to exploit democracy to set themselves up having power and privileges beyond the population. And it is the next logical step for democracy that we expose this and that we free the people from this condition. And so, let me reach back to my earlier statement that many people would be surprised by the statement that the people always know what is best for democracy. Well, why is that so? Can you not see that there is an elite who are more aware and better educated than the general population, and why wouldn't this elite then know better than the people? Well, it's because, as I started saying before I digressed myself into other topics, the goal of democracy is not to manifest a certain outer state. What is the goal of democracy really? It is that democracy finds its place in the ongoing raising of the collective awareness. So, democracy is a more sophisticated schoolroom for the people than a dictatorship, because the people have greater responsibility and greater influence. And the primary goal of history is not to create some static society in some ultimate state, but it is the ongoing raising of the awareness of the people. This can be grasped even by people who do not believe in reincarnation or ascended masters or any spiritual purpose. You can just look at history, that there has been an ongoing raising of the awareness of the people, and why should this not continue? And democracy is a part of that process. So democracy is a form of government that places greater responsibility on the people because they vote. And they can only vote based on what they know. And so this requires them to raise their awareness so they can make better decisions for their country. But if you recognize that the goal of democracy is not to manifest some ultimate state, but it is actually to raise the awareness of the people, then you see that the people always know best what is right for their country. Because the purpose of a democracy is to give people the opportunity to have a direct influence on their government, and then to see the result of this. And whether the result is this or that, whether some would call it good or bad or right or wrong, by the mere fact that the people make a decision and see the consequences, there will be a raising of awareness. And that is why, my beloved, the people always know best, because they are voting based on their current level of consciousness. What is best for the nation? It is that the people express their current level of consciousness, see the consequences, and therefore are given an opportunity to raise their consciousness. So from a certain perspective, you can say that the people don't know better. But from a larger perspective, they actually know better, in the sense that what they know or don't know will create consequences that will force them to raise their awareness. And when you realize that this is the goal, then you also see why the power elites are not right and are not necessary. Because what have the power elites always been doing? They have been working against the raising of the awareness of the people, because that is the only way they can control them. And so, You see, therefore, that the people, in a certain sense, always know best. Because they are outplaying their current state of consciousness, and when they see the results, they get the maximum opportunity to raise their awareness. The people will not get the maximum opportunity to raise their awareness by a small power elite coming out and saying, "This is the right thing for you." Now, this power elite may be right, my beloved, or an intellectual elite or political elite. There may be benevolent people. They may have the right vision of which direction the country should go in. But do you see my point? Until the people see it from within themselves, we haven't made progress towards the golden age, because we haven't raised awareness. And it is not a small elite, even a small elite of educated people or spiritual people. It is not a small elite that will bring the golden age into manifestation. Because the bottom line is always the awareness of the people. And you can have certain individuals who, whether they have followed a spiritual path in this lifetime or not, have raised their awareness to the point where they could receive an idea for me for a new kind of technology that could bring society forward. But I cannot release that technology until the awareness of the people has been raised to a certain level. This is the simple equation. And I know that now we are moving beyond what most people can accept from a universal perspective. But I want to give you this perspective. I also want you to hold the vision that many people will be able to again look at the universal perspective that once we recognize that consciousness is important, that there is a collective consciousness, that it has been raised throughout history, especially over the past 2,000 years, then we can start asking a question that has rarely been asked. And that is, what kind of beings are we? And there are millions of people in embodiment right now who are already grappling with this question. That is why many of them are looking at all of these alternative news, alternative forms of spirituality, New Age forms of spirituality, whatever you have. And why is this? Why are they looking at these? It is simply because they know at some part of their being that they have not been given an accurate view of who they are through traditional Christianity and scientific materialism. It is therefore quite possible for you to make the calls and envision that these people will shift their awareness to realize that the next logical step in the raising of the collective awareness is that you come into a greater awareness of the role of consciousness and the fact that human beings are conscious beings. You are conscious first and human beings second. In other words, your consciousness is not a product of the brain. Your consciousness is beyond the physical body, expresses itself through the physical body, but is more than the body. Millions of people are already open to this. Millions more are ready to become open to it and embrace these ideas. And therefore say, it is high time that we use our common sense to go beyond the view of ourselves that we have been given by Christianity, that we are sinners, that we are limited beings. It is also high time that we go beyond the view given by science that we are evolved apes, that we are material beings, and that our consciousness basically has no capability beyond the physical body. It is high time that we use the tools developed by science to investigate consciousness, to find out what kind of beings are we really? I've said before that in many of the older democracies, the major challenge that you are facing in the healthcare system is mental illness. What is mental illness? Well, it is again a lack of awareness, and it is a lack of awareness of what kind of beings you are, what consciousness is, what it means to be a conscious being, how you actually function like a conscious being. My beloved, look at medical science and how over the last 100 years you have increased your knowledge of how the physical body works, how there are these subtle processes in the physical body, how you need minerals, vitamins, hormones, this and that, in order for the body to function. Is it really so difficult to look at the human psyche and say, well, it is relatively simple to map physical behavior, but much more complex to map the psychological behavior of human beings. And this must mean that the psyche is far more complex than the physical body. So if there are all of these subtle processes in the physical body, is it not logical that there is much more to know about the psyche than we have discovered so far? And therefore it is high time that we start investigating this and we get rid of these biases of materialism that have held science hostage now for 200 years. Because there was an aspiring power elite that took over science and wanted to distance themselves from the old power elite that ruled religion. And it is time that we as a democratic society, as a democratic government, say we will have nothing to do with either of these power elites, and we want to set the minds of the people free, and we want to set the collective mind free so that we can sincerely investigate who are we, what kind of beings are we, what does it take for us to function psychologically. This is right under the surface, ready to break through, where millions of people suddenly see that this is obvious, that this is a logical next step, and that we need to do this. Again, this has nothing to do with ascended masters or particular spiritual direction or teaching. It is universal. Of course, once you have people starting to objectively look at consciousness, all kinds of avenues can open up. Because when you discover what kind of beings you truly are, you will realize that you are spiritual beings, that you came from a different realm, a different vibrational spectrum, and then you can take some of the discoveries of science that have already pointed to the existence of this. And all of a sudden, there are many more things that can be opened up, and therefore it is not unrealistic that within decades people will begin more and more to acknowledge the existence of spiritual beings and the spiritual realm. And there can be a great shift, not that people suddenly start following one religion or one spiritual teaching, but that there is a universal body of spiritual knowledge that suddenly starts emerging in people's consciousness. And even though they may express it by being members of a particular organization or following this or that teaching, they see that there is so much commonality that it gives them that greater sense of togetherness and oneness and unity, and suddenly there can be a shift where spirituality no longer divides people, but actually brings them together, not in one teaching and one movement, but in the universal awareness that has been talked about in the previous dispensations, where they connect in the heart. And they realize that even though they may have different outer beliefs and practices and rituals, there is some common knowledge that they are spiritual beings, and therefore we have something in common regardless of how we decide to express it. And this is again fairly universal, but of course it can also lead to a greater recognition of the existence of ascended masters, of the validity of our teachings, and it can bring many more people into looking at those teachings and thereby shifting their consciousness even more. It can even open up for have more widespread recognition of the existence of fallen beings and the need to transcend a certain level of consciousness so they can be removed from the planet. And many things can start happening. Once you get over that critical hump of recognizing that a democratic nation's primary responsibility is to be dedicated to raising the awareness of the people so that they can make more and more free choices. For only the person who is aware of all options and the consequences of the options can make a truly free choice. The power elites of all time, including the ones in democratic societies, have always wanted people to sign the contract without reading the fine print. Mm-hmm. But it is time that the people are allowed to read the fine print so they can decide whether they want to sign the contract with the power elite. And if they do not, then of course it is a responsibility of a democratic government to take the power away from the elite and give it back to the people. What else would be the responsibility? How can it be the responsibility of a democratic government to maintain status quo where the people are dominated and exploited by a power elite? So, if we return to the topic of exploitation, then the most subtle and severe form of exploitation is that the people have been programmed with disinformation about what kind of beings they are and what are the true possibilities for their own consciousness, for the collective consciousness, and for creating a better age. This is a very severe, very insidious form of exploitation. Exploitation by disinformation about who you are. So I ask you to be aware of this, to raise your own consciousness, to make the calls, and you will, my beloved, see that there will be breakthroughs in the raising of the collective awareness, and therefore you will see changes in democratic nations. Much of it can start here in Europe. That is why this dictation is given here. But of course, Europe is not the only place in the world where these breakthroughs can happen. But it is certainly a place where many people are prepared, where many people have embodied, because what is the primary requirement for these changes to happen? It is the willingness to openly debate and talk about issues. The state where society no longer has so many taboos that cannot be talked about. This is another weapon of the power elite to create a taboo. We cannot talk about this. But you need to see that in a democracy, there is, or there cannot be, there must not be any topic that you cannot talk about. For it is precisely behind the topics that you cannot talk about that the power elite can hide. And that is what limits the people. It starts by talking, and that is the opening for the raising of awareness. And the raising of the awareness is the direct cause of changes in the physical world. It has always been so, it will always be so, and it is in fact within the grasp of a large part of the population to recognize this, the role of consciousness in creating and manifesting physical conditions. It is a shift that many people are close to, many have made it, but many more are close to making that shift. As we have said, consciousness always comes before the physical manifestation. And when you know this, And when you recognize this, and when you take responsibility for your consciousness, that is when you can free yourself from all forms of exploitation. But if you will not acknowledge that consciousness precedes physical manifestation, then you cannot free yourself from the exploitation by one power elite or another, even one after another. And so, I thank you with the sincerity of my heart for being here, for being willing to open your minds and your chakras, to be the loudspeakers, so to speak, to radiate my ideas, my vibration, my being, my presence into the collective consciousness. Truly, it has been a powerful release, and I am grateful for your willingness to participate. Naturally, I have more to say on the topic of the Golden Age, but it shall be manifest at the right time. So for now, my gratitude and my love.